Hi everybody, this is Maria from the Counseling Center again, here for episode 4. And today we're going to talk about loneliness. So, oh my goodness, this whole idea of loneliness has changed so significantly now that we are all under self-quarantine. And the interesting thing to think about is that we all reported as a society being lonelier than ever the last couple years, even before the self-quarantine happened. So we've been talking about loneliness at Otterbein for a while now, but I thought it would be helpful to do a little online summary around some of the strategies that we've talked about, especially considering the fact that we're all so isolated from each other at the same time as being bombarded with a lot of stressful things. So let's talk about loneliness and maybe why it has been so chronically pervasive in today's society, and sort of biologically what's going on there and why we actually feel loneliness so often. All right. So a lot of this goes back to what I like to call the tribal days, when we sort of, as human beings, started to figure out our relationships with others. Before the time of tribes, we all sort of wandered around by ourselves, and our lives didn't live that long because a lot of times we would die because of the weather or an animal, or it was really hard to protect ourselves against all the things that were going on in our environment. And once we figured out that if we got together and formed tribes, and there were multiple human beings working together towards a common goal, we ended up being a lot more successful. And we lived a lot longer, and we were able to sort of accomplish goals that could have never been met if we didn't bond together as a group and sort of work towards things in unison. So these tribal days sort of set in motion and actually shifted how our brains worked and changed a lot of our neural pathways to sort of reinforce the fact that we really need each other. Connecting with other human beings is now an imperative part of our human existence, and it helps to protect us greatly against stressors. So we survived much longer as a species because of the ability to form tribes, and all of those long-lasting benefits still remain as far as like how we work and tick today. So in today's society, people belong to many, I would say, tribes, or many groups of people, right? So we have our family, we have our groups of friends, we have our coworkers, we have our classmates, we have these different groups that we sort of set aside and are formed different groups to accomplish a variety of different goals. So we tend to be able to be more successful when we work together as a team in these smaller tribe areas. We are all, as human beings, predisposed to care. So if we, for some reason, are no longer part of that group or no longer part of that tribe, or for some reason there's a break in a bond, we react very, very intensely. Usually when there's problems with our interpersonal relationships, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of you can relate, people who have experienced breakups or have experienced either with a significant other or with a friend, it tends to sort of like overtake everything else. No matter what else is going on, if there is a break in our relationship, it seems to sort of override everything else. And that is because our interpersonal relationships are so vitally important to our existence, right? We are predisposed to care. Whenever we feel lonely, whenever we feel rejected, it just means that we are reacting in a very pro-social manner, and that it's healthy for us to have those emotional responses. On the other hand, they are some of the most incredibly painful experiences that we experience because it is so important to connect to other human beings. Right, so some examples of times we might feel those breaks or might feel sort of that like loneliness because we're separated from our group, are maybe moving from one place to another. So we all recently moved away from campus back to our home, so missing friends whenever we switch friend groups or switch majors, which a lot of times results in switching friend groups. That can be a time when you experience this. A lot of times feeling homesick, a lot of when people first move to a certain place, really missing the place that they had moved from. I'd mentioned before the whole idea of breakups that can really cause a lot of this loneliness to sort of be activated. And then now that we're all under self-quarantine, and even though we can see each other on a more using technology, we don't have that face-to-face interaction, which can a lot of times activate a lot of loneliness in a lot of us as well. right? We are all very vulnerable to this social disconnection. So it's important that we develop and really think about some proactive strategies to be able to sort of support ourselves now that we're separated from each other in a different way that we haven't been in a very, very long time. So I'm going to start off with talking a little bit about some of these physical strategies. The first is to exercise. All right. So this is an idea of we feel so much more vulnerable when we can't be connected to other human beings that it tends to release fight or flight hormones. And in order for us to sort of like keep up and manage that, it's important for us to keep moving on a regular basis to help metabolize those off. Right. It's important to also focus on our breathing. So despite the fact that our body sort of like interprets social isolation as like a vulnerability and could lead to danger, we need to sort of be mindful of that and respond by deep breathing and activating our sort of like relaxation response to sort of counteract that increased stressor. It's important for us to kind of maintain open posture even though we're not around other people. So this idea of our being able to connect to other human beings, we've actually developed actual physical shifts and changes with how we move whenever we are around other people. We tend to have these open postures, which kind of allows us to like feel connected and not feel as lonely. And how we physically move our body can actually impact how we emotionally feel. So some strategies for being open are actually having our eyebrows up a little bit, and that allows us to look open and receptive to other people, and we can use that strategy even when we're doing technology connection like I'm doing with you today. Another is to kind of keep an open posture with our shoulders. Instead of hunched, we can keep our shoulders back, which allows us to kind of like be open and receptive to whatever sort of interpersonal connection that we are able to have at the moment. And another strategy is actually with our hands. So a really fun and easy sort of like way to sort of practice this is while you're engaging in conversations, even though someone can't see what's happening with the rest of your body, is to keep your hands open. And that allows your body and your emotions to be more receptive to that conversation. So there's some like physical strategies for you to be able to utilize to help sort of like manage as we're all disconnected through this time of quarantine, at least physically. All right. So let's talk a little bit about some emotional strategies. All right. So it's really important to be able to express our loneliness and to be able to talk about what it is we're experiencing with our loved ones. Part of the benefit of having other people in our life is that they are there to help share our stress. So whenever we used to function in tribes and we used to work towards common goals, whatever was stressing the tribe out, everybody worked and they all experienced it together. So the entire tribe, the entire group, the entire family felt the stress, and that one individual didn't have to experience it on their own. And the reality is we aren't biologically set up to be able to manage our stressors very well on our own. It's important that we're able to share those with others because that decreases the intensity of the stress on us when we share our experience verbally with someone else. So even though we're not around that person physically, it's important to still be expressing how we're feeling in an ongoing way, do however we can to help sort of reduce the intensity of the stress we're experiencing during all of this epidemic. It's important to talk about our feelings, and it's also important to give ourselves breaks. All right. So I feel sometimes like we're being bombarded with so much information via social media and via the news. All everybody's talking about are negative things, and it's important to take breaks from talking about negative things and to balance that with talking about neutral and positive topics. It can be really stressful on your relationship and on you physically to only focus on what is going on that is so stressful. Because if you really pay attention, there are other neutral and positive things happening concurrently at the same time. Usually that just doesn't get our attention. We're sort of set up to focus on the things that might cause us danger. And a lot of times all the positive and neutral things sort of fade into the background. Now's the time to actively and intentionally pay attention to those things and give yourselves a break from all of that negative, right? Whether that be putting boundaries around when you watch television, boundaries around your social media accounts, really sort of having conversations with your friends and loved ones and support systems saying, I really need a break from this. Can we talk about other areas of life? But it's important to sort of like set those boundaries and give yourselves breaks from having to think about all of those stressful components and develop healthy distraction techniques. And we've talked about some of those distraction techniques in some of the other episodes, and I would encourage you to refer back to them as we talk about how to proactively and reactively respond to stress. All right, so physically, it's all about getting your move on, right? And staying open, even during conversations. And emotionally, it's all about expressing your feeling and trying to stay connected via talking, even though we are all in self-quarantine and actually at a physical distance. So cognitively, there's a couple other strategies I'd like to mention as well. So remembering that this is normal. I mean, that I hear over and over again, we're all in this together. And this idea around that almost creates like a large tribe and a large group ideal around the fact that we're all experiencing the same thing all at the same time. And even though it still is painful, that recognition that this is normal and that everyone is going through this actually does reduce the intensity of how that stress is interpreted by your body. Everyone is feeling lonely at this time. All of that is going up. And so we as professionals and over at the Counseling Center, we are here to help. We would love to connect with you if you need connection. And we want to help you develop strategies to kind of help manage this really unusual and sort of unprecedented time. Another way to do this is to kind of increase this idea of self-talk. This is something I think that is very typical therapy, is this idea of self-talk. But I think that once again, we're sort of looking at this way of sort of balancing a lot of the negative that's going on and being intentional and finding times and opportunities for you to sort of talk about what's going right and what you are doing well, despite all of the adverse challenges. And remind also yourself that this is temporary. So even though it feels like such a long time and it feels like we've been separate, and during any period of loneliness, whether it be a breakup or a shift and change in schedule, all of those feelings are all very temporary, and they do go away and they do decrease over time. And it's about being able to manage at the space that you're in, knowing that it is not going to go on forever. So reminding yourself that this is normal, we're all feeling that way, increasing positive self-talk, and also remembering that is temporary can help reduce the intensity of how that stressor and how that loneliness really impacts you. And then we're going to sort of end by talking a little bit about some behavioral strategies. And some of these are a little bit of a repeat on what we talked about in some of these other episodes. But I'd like to reiterate that these are all transferable and they help in a variety of situations. So when we feel lonely, it's really important to make sure that you're avoiding drugs and alcohol, right? Even though initially it feels like it's helpful and it's kind of like helpful maybe in the short term, in the long term, it can really have some really negative impacts. It can actually increase your vulnerability to loneliness. Do things every single day that make you feel confident. So this is one of those sort of hacks. We're looking at activating some serotonin and some dopamine in your brain to help manage the loneliness. And so if you can find different strategies of things that you do well, if you really are a great runner, really increase that running. If you really are great at playing certain games or really sort of like great at like cheering up your friends, really sort of activate all of those components and try to do something every day that makes you feel like you're accomplishing, you're mastering something, and that you're confident. Schedule phone calls with friends. So sometimes I think that it feels strange when you call somebody and they're not available, or you try to FaceTime and they're not available, and then you end up feeling even more sort of vulnerable following that time when someone isn't there. It's important, and when we talked a little bit before about also adding things into your routine, is schedule those times. Schedule the FaceTime, schedule the phone call time. Then you know that you'll be a priority to them, and you can then have something really wonderful to look forward to when you do make that connection. Also, texting people on a regular basis and not even needing that other person to respond sometimes, but just sort of texting like what I know. That one thing that I've started to incorporate is texting what I'm grateful for. So I choose a different person in my contact list every day, and I go ahead and I text them. And what that does is that actually activates in me serotonin, and I feel really good for making that person's day. And I know that the people on the receiving end feel that way as well. And when I was sort of more busy and I went in having a lot of face-to-face time, it's easier sometimes, I think, to take things for granted, and being able to incorporate these other rituals into my routine have given me so much pleasure. I'm hoping that I'll be able to continue this once self-quarantine is over. Also incorporating small acts of kindness, really sort of like assisting people when you can. That all is sort of, once again, sort of activating serotonin in your brain to help sort of balance all the stress hormones that are being released, to kind of give you a sense of pleasure while also creating a positive experience for someone else. So sort of as a review, avoiding drugs and alcohol, doing things that make you feel confident every day, creating a sense of mastery, scheduling phone calls and FaceTime, texting friends and loved ones with notes of gratitude, and practicing small acts of kindness can all help balance our feelings of loneliness. Please feel free to email me or call me with any questions. I am at the Counseling Center. My name is Maria, and thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to talk to you soon.